Victims appear concerned about the recent comments by David Ford of the Alliance Party around alternative methods for punishment that would not involve the courts. What are your primary concerns on this issue?
Well, we would actually be very concerned because this is exactly what we were warning or trying to warn the people about. No disrespect to Mr. Ford, but the man doesn't live in the real world. He has never lived in a situation where he's in fear of his life day and daily, or he's come under attack from terrorists, or he's been caught up in bombs or whatever. The man doesn't know what that world's like. Now he's talking about pay-as-you-go policing. Basically, let's not annoy them too much. If somebody heads but somebody in the street or sticks a bottle in them, let's give them a fine. Don't be bothered bringing them to court. Does he not realise the whole idea of court is to deter people, is to stop them from doing these things, and to hand out a ticket like a parking ticket to somebody whenever they commit an offence on the street? If it wasn't so serious, it'd be laughable. Because this is unbelievable. Justice Minister talking about closing police stations. He's talking about now pay-as-you-go policing. This man needs to get real, because he certainly is creating no confidence in ourselves, and I'm sure other people in other parts of Northern Ireland. If this was in America and you carried an offence like that, you'd be handcuffed, put to the ground, and threw into the back of a police car, and probably go straight to jail. Here we're going to give them a ticket. It's just unbelievable.
As a victims group, you've often warned people and taken the message. With the opportunity in today's programme, what message would you give to the folks on the Hill? How impossible would this idea be in an area like South Armagh?
Well, I'll give an example. When it comes to justice, the Justice Minister, whenever I suggested first off that given the system of government that we have, that the SDLP actually were probably next in line for it, I was condemned by certain members of the DUP and other people. But now we see the Unionist Party actually going to support an SDLP candidate. So obviously, we don't like to crow, but we were first off the mark in suggesting that you can't have one situation for government and another if it doesn't suit. You can either police or govern in a certain way. You can't have both. You can't govern in a way that then, if it doesn't suit you, you change the rules. And that's what's worrying here. What happens whenever they are actually successful in some of these murder attempts that they have been trying out, especially in South Armagh? Or we need somebody who's prepared to stand up to the system, somebody who's prepared to stand up to the British government and the Irish government, and indeed our own politicians, and say, hold on, we need proper policing in these areas. And irrespective of the political situation here, I'm putting extra resources into policing, and I'm demanding that the Chief Constable police areas like South Armagh no different than he would the Malone Road. I don't believe we have that in the Justice Minister that they're proposing. Perhaps maybe with the SDLP or somebody from the Unionist Party, or indeed even the DUP, but we certainly do not have it with the Alliance Party. And I'm not saying that out of disrespect for the Alliance, but they don't live in the real world.
We're aware that on the day that devolution was agreed at Stormont, you had a high-profile meeting with the Ulster Unionist Party. It would appear that since that meeting there has been a meeting of minds between that party and the victims. Could you go into any detail about some of the issues and some of the concerns you raised, and any commitments that that party gave following the meeting?
Well, to be truthful, the issues that we raised, we have been raising for quite a while. We raised them with the DUP and they agreed with us before they went into government. We now raised them with the Ulster Unionist Party, and they now are agreeing with what we're saying as well. We know that politicians sometimes have to adjust for the political situation at the time, but there's adjusting and there's somersaulting right over, and that's basically what had happened in the past. We've seen a complete somersault. Now the unionists have met with us. They agree with a lot of what we're saying, I'm not saying I agree with it at all, but there is a meeting of minds where basically they are listening to the people on the ground and they are taking it on board. Now, I just hope it's not a case that, as we had in the past, where we had a meeting of minds with the DUP and then they forgot completely what was said between us.
And again, if you have an opportunity now to send out a message to the politicians about this plan and other concerns you have around the devolution of policing and justice, what would that simple message be?
Well, it's quite simple. What we've been saying for the last 12 years, we haven't changed in our message. Everything we've said about how the Sinn Féin would operate and how we would have a two-track approach then, where we would have the political terrorism and then we would have the actually military terrorism, both operating hand in hand. That's exactly what's going on. We're now being terrorised on two fronts, where before we could actually turn to our politicians to do something about it. Now we can't do that because one is working hand in hand with the other. Well, I don't believe we've been wrong in anything we have said or predicted in this last 12 years. So why is some of these parties now not prepared to listen to us? Policing and justice will end up out of the hands of the law-abiding community, and it will end up in the hands of the perpetrators, the people who actually butchered our police officers, our soldiers, our ordinary civilians on the streets, let them be Protestant or Catholic. And that's where we're going to end up. We were promised that would never happen. The same way we were promised that Sinn Féin IRA would never have an input into what the victims would be, how the victims would be dealt with. We were promised they would never have an input to that. They now have the say over the very pound that goes to a victim and what way it is spent and actually what victim it will go to. Sinn Féin now can actually stop the funding going to certain victims groups, which they are out to do with ourselves. And I do predict that Sinn Féin and other parties will do everything they can to try and remove FAIR from the equation. But the one thing they can't do, and that's remove the support of the ordinary people and the ordinary victims on the ground.
We have learnt that the recent announcement by the Victims Commission criticising the WFM-DFM was as a result of pressure brought to bear in the forum. Do you see this as a vindication of your place on the forum? Clearly it was a message. The funding issue was something which you committed to take and to raise within the forum to put pressure on the commissioners. Is this now a result of the work that you've been trying to do behind the scenes in the forum?
Well, I think one of the points I need to make clear about the Victims Commissioners and the forum, they are two separate identities. You know, the Victims Commissioners are separate from the forum. But I have to say that I feel that if I hadn't been there within the forum, that there's a lot of things would have went through, a lot of decisions that would have been made that did not represent the thinking of the majority of the unionist community. And I have at times stood as a lone voice within the forum, and at times I have been joined by other people. Obviously I can't speak too much about what goes on in the forum, but people have criticised me for going on to the forum. And the only reason I went on to the forum, I get nothing out of it except what I put into it. And the only reason I'm there is for the betterment of our people and the victims in Northern Ireland, let them be Catholics or Protestants, but the ordinary law-abiding victim. And I believe if myself and a few other individuals who are there weren't there, that the forum would simply be making suggestions similar to the Eames Bradley. And at the end of the day, the Eames Bradley probably would have went through if it hadn't been for the stance that FAIR took and a few other victims who were along with the FAIR group. If we hadn't took that stance, Eames and Bradley would have went through. And I believe it's the same with the forum. If we didn't take the stance that we did by joining the forum, a lot of things would have went through that shouldn't have. And thankfully we've been able to stop some of them things.
Well, Frazer, thanks very much.